Eva Green stood in the spacious lobby of TechCore Industries, a company she had recently purchased, but one she had only ever seen from afar until today. The gleaming glass walls, the marble floor beneath her feet, and the hustle of employees rushing from one meeting to the next told a story of wealth, power, and prestige. But Eva knew better. Beneath the surface, this company was rotting from within. It was only a few months ago that she had finalized the deal, purchasing the failing tech giant that had once dominated the industry. TechCore had been a beacon of innovation and leadership, but years of poor management, ego-driven decisions, and a lack of vision had driven it to the brink of collapse. Now it was her responsibility to save it. But Ava wasn't the type to rely on boardroom meetings and executive reports to get to the heart of the problem. She had a different plan, one that would let her see the company from the ground up. Dressed in a simple janitor's uniform, with her long dark hair tied back and her face barely recognizable, she was no longer Eva Green, the successful business mogul. She was now Mia Clark, the new janitor. Her decision to disguise herself wasn't one made lightly. She had spent her life fighting her way up from the bottom, growing up in a struggling family where she had seen firsthand how the powerful ignored those they deemed unimportant. It was this experience that had shaped her, giving her the strength and resilience to build her own business empire. Now she was determined to bring that same strength to TechCore. Taking a deep breath, Eva, or rather Mia, picked up her cleaning cart and pushed it towards the back of the lobby. No one gave her a second glance. The first day on the job was as revealing as it was humbling. Eva quickly realized that in her new role as a janitor, she had become invisible. To the employees around her, she was nothing more than a fixture in the room, a shadow moving silently from one corner to the next, wiping down tables, emptying trash cans, and mopping the floors. She didn't mind. In fact, this was exactly what she had wanted, an unobstructed view into the true workings of the company, without the gloss of executive presentations or HR reports. As she moved from one room to the next, she overheard snippets of conversations. Most were mundane: plans for the weekend, complaints about the cafeteria food, gossip about office romances. But some were more telling. In the break room, a group of middle managers gathered around a table, sipping coffee and laughing. Among them was Oliver Kane, a tall, arrogant man who seemed to relish in his role of authority. His voice carried easily across the room, dripping with condescension. "We've got a meeting later about cutting costs," Oliver said with a smirk. "Word is, we're going to have to lay off some people. Honestly, I'm surprised it hasn't happened sooner. We're carrying so much dead weight in this place." One of his colleagues, a woman named Samantha Turner, nodded in agreement. "I wouldn't be surprised if they cut the janitorial staff," she added. "I mean, how many do we really need? I barely see them doing anything." Eva kept her head down, continuing to wipe the counter near the coffee machine. Her heart tightened at Samantha's words, but she didn't react. She was here to observe, not to engage. As the conversation continued, Eva realized just how deep the rot in the company ran. The upper-level employees, the ones who made the decisions, were disconnected from the people who kept the company running: the janitors, the clerks, the administrative assistants. They saw them as expendable, barely acknowledging their humanity. This was the culture Eva had to change. That afternoon, Eva met Daniel, one of the other janitors on the cleaning crew. He was in his late 30s, with tired eyes and a gentle smile. Unlike the others, Daniel noticed her. He introduced himself with a handshake and a warmth that stood in stark contrast to the coldness she had felt from the executives. "First day?" he asked, leaning on his mop. Eva nodded, grateful for the small gesture of kindness. "Just getting the hang of things." "It's not too bad," Daniel said. "You get used to being invisible after a while." There was a sadness in his voice that tugged at Ava's heart. She had spent her life fighting to be seen, to be recognized for her talents, and now here she was, choosing to blend into the background. But for Daniel, and others like him, it wasn't a choice. It was the reality of their lives. Over the next few days, Ava learned more about Daniel. He had 2 young children and a wife who worked part-time at a local grocery store. They were barely scraping by, living paycheck to paycheck. Daniel had been working at TechCore for nearly 10 years, but despite his dedication, he had never been offered a raise or promotion. "They don't see us," Daniel said one day, as they sat together during their lunch break. To them, we're just bodies filling a role. If they could replace us with machines, they would. Eva's resolve hardened. She couldn't let this continue. A week later, Eva overheard a conversation that would change everything. It was early in the morning, and she was cleaning the conference room when Oliver Kane and a few other executives entered, preparing for a board meeting. She quickly moved to the far end of the room, hoping to remain unnoticed. As they set up their laptops and prepared their presentations, they began discussing the upcoming agenda. Layoffs were at the top of the list. "We need to cut at least 20% of the lower-level staff," Oliver said, his voice filled with the same arrogance Eva had come to expect. "If we do that, we'll save enough to keep the board satisfied for another quarter." Several others nodded in agreement, their eyes fixed on the charts displayed on the wall. Eva's heart raced. She had seen this strategy play out too many times before. Layoffs that hurt the most vulnerable, cuts that left the workforce depleted and disheartened. The company was being stripped from the inside out, with no thought to the long-term impact of these decisions. One of the men, Mark Hastings, a mid-level manager with ambitions that far exceeded his abilities, glanced at Eva briefly before rolling his eyes. "These janitors," he muttered under his breath, barely audible to the others. "We could cut them too. I mean, they're barely necessary. I don't know why we even need so many of them." The comment stung, but Eva kept her face neutral, continuing to wipe down a nearby table. She had endured worse in her life, but it still amazed her how easy it was for some people to dehumanize others when they thought no one of importance was listening. Eva wasn't here to react to petty insults. She had a mission. As the days went on, Eva continued to observe, to listen, and to endure the humiliations that came with her disguise. But with each passing day, her understanding of the rot in the company deepened. She saw the fear in the eyes of the lower-level employees, the anxiety in their voices as rumors of layoffs spread through the office. In the break room, she overheard conversations filled with dread. People were scared for their jobs, for their livelihoods. And all the while, the executives continued to plan their cuts, oblivious to the human cost. Eva knew she couldn't stay silent much longer. The time for action was approaching, but she needed to be strategic. She needed to wait for the right moment. The days at TechCore Industries dragged on, each blending into the next as Eva continued her work as the unassuming janitor, Mia Clark. The monotony of cleaning, emptying trash bins, and wiping down surfaces became a routine, but Eva's sharp mind never rested. She watched, listened, and gathered crucial information, all while blending seamlessly into the background. Despite her disguise, there was no escaping the weight of what she witnessed. Oliver Kane, as arrogant as ever, continued to lead the charge in dehumanizing the employees. His condescension toward lower-level workers was a constant presence in the office. One afternoon, as she scrubbed a hallway floor, Eva overheard a conversation that left her stomach churning. Two executives walked past, speaking in low voices, but their words were clear enough to reach her. "We can't keep paying these salaries. These people aren't adding value to the company. If we start trimming, we can save the bottom line, get rid of some administrative staff, and even cut back on benefits." Eva tightened her grip on the mop handle, her mind spinning. Every word she heard only deepened her resolve. These men didn't care about the people working to keep the company afloat. They only cared about their own positions, their own comfort. But TechCore's problems ran deeper than just financial mismanagement. They were cultural. Eva often found herself in the cafeteria, blending into the sea of uniforms, sitting at the same chip table in the back of the room. It was here that the cracks in the foundation of TechCore were most evident. The employees were disengaged, their faces drawn, their conversations hushed and filled with anxiety. Daniel, the janitor she had come to know, sat beside her on his lunch break, a sandwich in hand. His face was tired but kind as he shared more about his life. "They keep talking about layoffs," he said quietly, his eyes darting toward the executives who sat in their own corner of the cafeteria, separate from the rest. "I've been here for 10 years and I've never seen morale this low. People are scared, Mia. They're worried about feeding their families, paying their bills. It's not right." Eva nodded, her chest heavy with guilt. She had the power to change this. She was the one with the ability to make the decisions that could save people like Daniel. But for now, she had to remain quiet. Her time would come. As the days passed, Eva saw the invisible workforce, the janitors, the receptionists, the administrative assistants, working tirelessly, often without thanks or recognition. These were the people who kept the company running, yet they were treated like nothing more than numbers on a spreadsheet, disposable. One afternoon, Eva found herself back in the break room, cleaning as usual. The room buzzed with the low hum of employees gossiping and sharing office drama. Samantha Turner stood near the coffee machine, laughing with her colleagues. "Did you see that new janitor?" Samantha said, her voice loud and filled with disdain. "She barely speaks. I bet she doesn't even know English. Probably just here to fill a quota." A chorus of laughter followed, but Eva remained silent, her face impassive as she continued wiping down the table. She had learned long ago to let these things roll off her back, but it wasn't the insults that bothered her. What disturbed her was the complacency. No one questioned the casual racism. No one stood up for the people they considered beneath them. Eva had always known that TechCore's problems went beyond financial mismanagement. Now she saw the root of the issue. The company was toxic from the inside out. The culture was broken, and unless she took drastic action, no amount of restructuring would save it. The tension in the office grew with each passing day. Rumors of layoffs spread like wildfire, and the atmosphere became thick with anxiety. Employees whispered in hallways, their eyes downcast, afraid of what was to come. Eva, meanwhile, continued to work silently, waiting for the right moment to reveal herself. She knew that when the time came, the executives would have no idea what hit them. But for now, she continued to endure, learning more with each passing day. It was during one such day, as Eva cleaned one of the larger conference rooms, that she overheard Mark Hastings, one of the mid-level managers, speaking with a group of senior staff. "We're going to have to cut another 15% of the workforce," Mark said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "I don't see why we need so many janitors or lower-level employees. They're just dead weight." Eva clenched her teeth, fighting the urge to speak up. She knew now that the problems went far deeper than she had initially imagined. The company was being gutted from the inside out, with no regard for the people who made it function. The next day, Eva sat alone in the break room, sipping her coffee from the same chipped mug. The room was filled with idle chatter as other employees gathered in small groups, laughing and discussing their weekend plans. Eva had learned to tune out their conversations, but today the words cut a little deeper. A young intern, Tim, stood by the coffee machine, talking loudly with his friends. "I don't get why they keep so many janitors around. How hard can it be to clean a building? They just push brooms and wipe down desks, right? My grandmother could do that job." Laughter erupted around him, and Eva felt her hands tighten around the handle of her mug. She had long since learned to endure comments like these, to let them roll off her back without showing any outward reaction. But inside, she felt the familiar sting of being reduced to a stereotype, of being judged solely by the uniform she wore. Tim turned to look at Eva briefly, his eyes flicking over her as if she were part of the furniture. "Look at her. Doesn't even talk to anyone. Probably doesn't speak English." More laughter followed, and Eva kept her gaze firmly on her coffee, refusing to give them the satisfaction of a response. These people had no idea who she was, or what she was capable of. As the days passed, Eva's observations became even more troubling. She watched as employees like Daniel and the other janitors worked tirelessly, while the executives remained oblivious to the struggles of the workforce. There were no words of encouragement, no acknowledgement of the hard work being done, just dismissal, dehumanization, and a pervasive sense of superiority. One afternoon, Eva cleaned the office of Henry Richards, the CEO, while he and several of his colleagues discussed the future of the company. Their conversation was focused entirely on financial reports, projections, and the cost-cutting measures they plan to implement. "We need to reduce staff by at least 25%, Henry said, his voice cold and detached. "That should give us enough breathing room for the next quarter." Ava's heart sank. The decisions being made were short-sighted, focused only on immediate financial gains, with no thought given to the long-term health of the company or the well-being of the employees. As she finished cleaning, Eva overheard Mark Hastings muttering to one of his colleagues. "These janitors," he scoffed, "walking around like they're important. I've never seen them do anything that justifies having more than one or two in the whole building." Eva felt her chest tighten. She had seen enough. She knew that if she didn't act soon, the company would spiral into a disaster that could have been prevented. The next day, the tension in the office was palpable. The rumors of impending layoffs had reached a fever pitch, and employees were on edge, unsure of what the future held. Eva knew that the time for action was drawing near. She had gathered enough information, endured enough humiliation, and now it was time to take the next step. As she entered the office that morning, her mind was focused on the upcoming board meeting. The executives would be discussing the company's future, and Eva knew that their decisions would only make things worse. But this time, she wouldn't stand by and watch. This time, she would make her voice heard. The day of the board meeting had arrived, and the atmosphere in the office was more tense than ever. Eva could feel the weight of her decision pressing down on her. The executives were about to make decisions that would change the lives of hundreds of employees. Decisions based on flawed assumptions, financial panic, and, above all, arrogance. Eva knew this was the moment she had been waiting for. Dressed in her janitor's uniform, with her cleaning cart in tow, she moved through the halls unnoticed. Her heart pounded in her chest as she entered the boardroom, where the senior executives were already gathered. She kept her head down, pretending to clean as she waited for the meeting to start. Oliver Kane was the first to arrive, as brash and confident as ever. He took his seat at the long glass table and began setting up his laptop, glancing briefly at Eva with an air of disdain before turning his attention to the others. "Today's the day," Oliver said with a smirk. "We're going to trim the fat, make the tough decisions. It's for the good of the company." The others murmured in agreement, oblivious to the consequences of their actions. Mark Hastings entered next, his expression smug as always. He barely noticed Eva standing in the corner, wiping down the whiteboard as the room filled with executives. Eva waited patiently, her pulse quickening as she listened to their conversation. It was the same rhetoric she had heard for weeks: cutting costs, laying off lower-level employees, outsourcing departments to save money. Not once did anyone mention the human cost of these decisions, the effect they would have on people like Daniel and the other janitors who worked tirelessly every day. Finally, Henry Richards, the CEO, entered the room. He glanced around the table before taking his seat at the head, his expression grim. "We're in trouble," he said, his voice serious. "Our projections for the next quarter are worse than anticipated. If we don't take immediate action, we're looking at a total collapse." Eva's heart tightened. She knew now was the time. As the discussion continued, Eva moved to the corner of the room, her cleaning cart still in hand. The executives were so engrossed in their conversation that they didn't notice her presence. But Eva had heard enough. She set her mop aside and walked to the head of the table, where Henry Richards sat, his eyes fixed on the spreadsheets in front of him. She tapped him lightly on the shoulder, her voice calm but firm. "Excuse me." Henry looked up, startled by the interruption, his brow furrowed in confusion as he turned to face her. "Yes? What is it?" All eyes in the room turned to Eva, the janitor they had barely noticed for weeks. The silence was deafening. Eva took a deep breath, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small envelope, the document that would reveal her true identity. "I think it's time I spoke." A ripple of confusion spread through the room as the executives exchanged puzzled glances. Oliver Kane, ever the opportunist, was the first to break the silence. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "This is a private meeting. You have no business here." Eva didn't flinch. She handed the envelope to Henry Richards, her gaze steady. "I think you'll find I have every right to be here." Henry's hands trembled as he opened the envelope and scanned the contents. His face went pale as the reality of the situation sank in. The document confirmed what Eva had known all along. She was the majority owner of TechCore Industries. She had been in control for weeks, watching, listening, and waiting for the right moment. This can't be right," Henry stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, it's very right," Eva replied, her voice calm and composed. "I've owned this company for weeks now. I've been watching everything that's happened here, listening to the way you talk about your employees, the decisions you've made. And I've seen enough to know that the path you're on will destroy this company." The room erupted into chaos. The executives spoke over one another, trying to make sense of what was happening. Mark Hastings was the loudest, his face red with anger as he stood up from his chair. "You can't do this! You're just a janitor!" Eva turned to face him, her expression cold. "I'm not just anything. I'm the woman who now controls your job, your salary, and the future of this company. And I'll be making sure that people like you, people who think they can walk all over others without consequence, are held accountable." The silence that followed was deafening. The power dynamic in the room had shifted completely, and the executives knew it. They had mocked her, dismissed her, treated her as invisible, and now they were at her mercy. The fallout from Eva's revelation was swift and severe. As she took her seat at the head of the table, the seat that had once belonged to Henry Richards, the room remained in the stunned silence. No one dared speak, too shocked by the sudden turn of events. Eva looked around the table, her gaze meeting each pair of disbelieving eyes. She could see the fear, the confusion, and the anger in their faces. These were the people who had mocked her, ignored her, and dehumanized her for weeks. Now they were the ones whose futures were in her hands. Oliver Kane was the first to break the silence. He stood from his chair, fists clenched, his voice shaking with fury. "This is ridiculous. You're just a janitor. You can't come in here and act like you own the place." Eva turned to him slowly, her voice steady as steel. "But I do own the place, Oliver. I've owned it for weeks, long before you ever realized I was here. And during that time, I've seen exactly how you and others like you treat the people who work here. The janitors, the administrative staff, the people you think don't matter." Oliver's face twisted in anger, but there was something else behind it now. Fear. He knew what was coming, even if he wasn't ready to admit it. Eva took a step toward him, her voice quiet but firm. "You're fired." The room gasped in unison, but Eva didn't waver. She locked eyes with Oliver, her gaze cold and unyielding. "Effective immediately. Security will escort you out of the building." The color drained from Oliver's face. He opened his mouth to argue, but before he could say a word, two security guards entered the room, standing by the door. Eva gave them a small nod. "Escort Mr. Kane out." The guards moved toward Oliver, who looked around the room for support, but none of the other executives dared to come to his defense. They were all too afraid, too shocked by what had just happened. Oliver muttered something under his breath as the guards led him out, but his protests were weak. His confidence had been shattered. With Oliver Kane gone, Eva turned her attention back to the rest of the executives. The room was still, the tension palpable. She could feel the weight of her power, the power she had worked so hard to achieve, and she was ready to use it to reshape the company. "Let's talk about the future of TechCore," Eva said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. The remaining executives looked at one another, unsure of what to say. Henry Richards, still seated at the head of the table, cleared his throat awkwardly. "Miss Green," he began cautiously, "if I may, what exactly are your intentions here? I think we're all a bit unclear about the direction you plan to take." Eva nodded slowly, her gaze sweeping the room as she spoke. "My intentions are simple. This company has been in free fall for months, and the decisions you've been making are leading it toward collapse. I bought this corporation to save it, but I can't do that if the same toxic leadership remains in place." Her words hung in the air, the implication clear. Eva wasn't just here to replace a few people. She was here to overhaul the entire company culture. The way TechCore had been run was unacceptable, and starting today, that would change. "For too long," Eva continued, "this company has been run by people who think they can treat others like they're disposable. You talk about cutting jobs and outsourcing departments, it's nothing. But you've forgotten that behind every number is a person. You've forgotten that the success of this company depends on the people who work here. Not just the executives, but the janitors, the administrative staff, the workers on the ground." Her words were met with silence. Some of the executives nodded slowly, realizing the truth in what she was saying. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats, clearly fearful of what her new direction would mean for them. By the time the meeting was over, Eva had made it clear the company would no longer be run by those who dehumanized their employees. Several more executives were quietly dismissed, their severance packages already prepared. Eva had no patience for those who couldn't adapt to her vision, and she made it clear that anyone who wasn't willing to embrace the new direction would be shown the door. Later that evening, after most of the executives had left the building, Eva walked through the now empty halls of TechCore Industries. The office felt different now, quieter, almost peaceful. She knew that the changes she had implemented today were just the beginning. There was still much work to be done, but for the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of accomplishment. As she passed by the office where her name would soon be engraved on the door, she paused for a moment, reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. She had endured weeks of humiliation and disrespect, but it had all been worth it. She had seen the true nature of the people who had once held power in this company, and now they were gone. But more importantly, Eva had proven something to herself. She had always known she had the strength to succeed, but now she had the power to change the lives of the people who worked for her. She had the opportunity to create a company where everyone was valued, where no one was treated as disposable. As she stood in the quiet hallway, Eva allowed herself a small smile. The storm had come and gone, and she had emerged victorious. The day after the boardroom confrontation, Eva stepped into her office as the official CEO of TechCore Industries. The brass nameplate outside the door, still bearing the name of the former CEO, would soon be replaced with her own. But this wasn't just about titles or power. It was about leading the company into a new era, one that valued every employee, not just those in the executive suite. Alexandra Grant, the business strategist Eva had worked with in the past, entered the office with a warm but focused smile. She was exactly the kind of leader Eva needed by her side. A sharp, no-nonsense strategist who understood the importance of corporate culture and long-term vision. "Ready to get started?" Alexandra asked, settling into the chair across from Eva's desk. Eva nodded. "We have a lot of work to do. I want to start by looking at the departments where the most damage has been done, the places where people are struggling the most." Together, they pored over reports, employee feedback, and data Eva had collected during her time undercover. The janitorial staff, administrative assistants, and lower-level employees had been the most neglected, often bearing the brunt of the company's poor decisions. This was where they needed to begin, by showing these employees that things were going to change. One of Eva's first orders of business was to hold an all-company town hall. The employees were nervous, their trust in leadership shattered after years of mismanagement and exploitation. But Eva knew that building a new foundation for the company meant starting with open communication. Standing in front of hundreds of employees, Eva felt the weight of their expectations. She had seen the fear in their eyes, the uncertainty about their jobs and their futures, but she was determined to show them that things were going to be different under her leadership. "I know many of you have been through tough times," Eva began, her voice steady but empathetic. "You've been working hard without recognition, and you've seen decisions made that didn't put you first. That's going to change. I didn't buy this company to lay off employees or make quick cuts. I'm here to rebuild TechCore from the ground up, and that means investing in you." A few heads lifted, and Eva could feel the energy in the room begin to shift. She continued, "We're going to focus on innovation and long-term growth, but more importantly, we're going to focus on the people who make this company run. No one here is disposable. From the janitors to the executives, everyone plays a role, and I'm committed to making sure every single person is valued and heard." The room was silent for a moment, then a murmur of agreement spread through the crowd. Daniel, the janitor Eva had befriended, stood in the back, a small smile on his face. He was starting to believe in the change Eva promised. While many employees welcomed Eva's vision, not everyone was on board. Some of the remaining executives, those who had survived the initial restructuring, were resistant to the changes she was implementing. They believed her ideas were too idealistic, that focusing on employee well-being would hurt profits. James Holloway, one of the company's largest investors, voiced his concerns in a private meeting with Eva and Alexandra. "I understand that you want to improve morale and treat employees better," James began, his tone cautious. "But we can't lose sight of the bottom line. If we focus too much on making everyone happy, we could be sacrificing profits." Eva listened carefully, understanding that James was coming from a place of concern for the financial health of the company. But she knew that short-term profit-driven decisions were exactly what had led TechCore to the brink of collapse in the first place. "I hear your concerns," Eva replied, her voice calm but firm. "But I believe that investing in our people is the best way to secure long-term success. Companies that prioritize their employees see higher levels of innovation, productivity, and loyalty. If we continue down the path of layoffs and cuts, we're only delaying the inevitable." James frowned, unconvinced, but Alexandra stepped in, providing data and examples of companies that had thrived by adopting similar approaches. Slowly but surely, Eva and Alexandra began to win him over. "We're not abandoning profits," Eva assured James. "We're building a stronger foundation so that when we grow, it's sustainable. And I promise you, we will grow." As Eva and Alexandra began rolling out their new initiatives, employee training programs, wellness benefits, and innovation labs, not everyone adapted well. Some of the middle managers, like Mark Hastings, who had barely survived the last round of firings, pushed back hard against the new culture. Mark had kept his position by the skin of his teeth after Oliver Kane's dismissal, but it was clear he hadn't learned from the changes. He continued to foster the same toxic environment in his department, ignoring Eva's new policies and treating his employees with the same disdain as before. One afternoon, Eva received a formal complaint from several employees in Mark's department. They described an environment of fear, bullying, and intimidation, directly contradicting the culture Eva was trying to build. Eva called Mark into her office the next day. "You've been given every opportunity to adapt," she told him, her tone cold and direct. "I've made it clear that the culture in this company is changing, but from what I've heard, you're still treating people as if they don't matter." Mark crossed his arms, trying to look defiant, but Eva could see the fear in his eyes. He knew he was on thin ice. "You've got two options," Eva continued. "You can either embrace the new direction and start treating your employees with the respect they deserve, or you can find another company that values the way you operate." Mark left the meeting with a pale face, and Eva knew that his days at TechCore were numbered. Despite the resistance from some of the old guard, TechCore began to turn a corner. The employees who had once lived in fear of layoffs were now starting to trust in Eva's leadership. Morale improved, and with it, productivity began to rise. Eva's investment in the innovation labs paid off when one of the teams developed a groundbreaking software that caught the attention of several major clients. It was exactly the kind of breakthrough the company needed to secure its financial future. Word of the new direction at TechCore began to spread, and soon other companies and industries started looking to Eva as a leader in corporate transformation. She was invited to speak at industry conferences, where she shared her vision for a company built on respect, innovation, and sustainability. The tide was turning. Eva's next focus was on rebuilding trust with the lower-level employees, the ones who had been most hurt by the previous leadership's actions. She held one-on-one meetings with key workers from every department, listening to their concerns and gathering feedback on how the company could improve. During one such meeting with Samantha Turner, the administrative assistant who had once mocked Eva, there was an awkward tension in the air. Samantha had realized after Eva's reveal that she had been wrong to judge so quickly. "I'm sorry for how I acted," Samantha said, her voice shaky. "I didn't know who you were. I didn't think—" Eva gave her a gentle smile. "It's not about who I was or wasn't. The important thing is that we're changing how we treat everyone in this company. That means we all need to do better. Not just the executives, but everyone." Samantha nodded, clearly relieved to have a second chance. Eva's focus on forgiveness, understanding, and growth was spreading throughout the company, helping to heal the wounds of the past. Months after Eva had taken control, TechCore was a different company. The toxic culture that had once defined it had been replaced with a sense of purpose and pride. Employees were no longer afraid for their jobs, and innovation flourished in ways Eva had only dreamed of when she first took over. Daniel, who had been one of the janitors when Eva started undercover, had been promoted to a supervisory role in the facilities department. His dedication and hard work hadn't gone unnoticed, and he became a symbol of the new TechCore, a place where anyone, no matter their role, could thrive. Eva stood in front of her window, looking out over the city skyline. The journey had been long and difficult, but she had done it. TechCore was thriving, and it was because she had dared to believe that a company could succeed by putting its people first. But Eva knew her work wasn't finished. There were always new challenges, new obstacles to overcome. The future was bright, and she was ready to lead TechCore into whatever came next. 6 months had passed since Eva's revelation in the boardroom, and TechCore Industries had undergone a profound transformation. The tension that had once filled the halls had been replaced by an air of optimism. Employees walked with their heads held high, proud to be part of a company that valued their work and their contributions. Eva sat in her office, reviewing the latest quarterly reports. For the first time in years, TechCore's profits were on the rise, driven not by cost-cutting measures, but by innovation, improved productivity, and the loyalty of its employees. The new software developed in the Innovation Lab had become a hit with clients, and the company had secured several new contracts that promised long-term stability. A soft knock on the door brought Eva out of her thoughts. It was Alexandra Grant, her strategist and right-hand woman, holding a folder filled with new projects and initiatives. "You've done it," Alexandra said, taking a seat. "The company is thriving, and the employees are happier than they've ever been. This is exactly what you envisioned." Eva smiled, but it was a smile tinged with the exhaustion of months of hard work. "It wasn't easy," she replied. "There were moments when I wasn't sure we'd make it. But we did. And now," Alexandra said, flipping through the folder, "we have the opportunity to expand. These new contracts will allow us to grow into markets we hadn't even considered before." Eva nodded, but her mind wasn't focused on expansion just yet. Sustaining the change was her first priority. "Growth is great, but I don't want to rush it. We need to make sure the foundation we've built is strong enough to handle it. The culture we've created is fragile. It only takes one bad decision to start unraveling everything we've worked for." Alexandra agreed. They both knew that maintaining the new culture was as important as driving profits. It wasn't just about what they had achieved. It was about making sure the values they had instilled became permanent. As TechCore continued its upward trajectory, Eva began to think about the people who had once been part of the company's toxic past. Mark Hastings, who had been fired months ago, had reached out, seeking a second chance. Eva sat in her office, reading the email Mark had sent. He was contrite, apologizing for the way he had treated his employees and admitting that he had been wrong to resist the changes she had implemented. He asked for an opportunity to prove that he had learned from his mistakes. Eva had always believed in second chances. After all, she had risen from nothing to build her empire because someone had believed in her potential. But she knew that giving someone like Mark a second chance was a risk, one that could backfire if he hadn't truly changed. She called Alexandra to discuss the matter. "Do you think he deserves another shot?" Alexandra asked, her brow furrowed as she considered the implications. "I believe people can change," Eva replied, her voice thoughtful. "But I also believe in accountability. If Mark really wants to come back, he'll have to earn his way back in and prove that he's committed to the new direction." After some deliberation, Eva made her decision. She would allow Mark to return, but not as a manager. Instead, he would start in a lower-level position, working closely with the teams he had once dismissed. It would be his chance to rebuild his reputation from the ground up, if he could. A year after Eva had taken control of TechCore, the company held its annual employee appreciation event. The atmosphere was festive, with decorations lining the halls and employees gathered in the main atrium, sharing stories of the past year's successes. Eva stood on the stage, looking out at the sea of faces. These were the people who had believed in her vision, who had trusted her when she promised to turn the company around. Many of them had been skeptical at first, but now they were proud to be part of something greater than themselves. She took a deep breath and began her speech. "I want to thank each and every one of you for the hard work and dedication you've shown this past year," Eva said, her voice filled with gratitude. "When I came into this company, I knew we had a long road ahead of us. I knew that the challenges we faced weren't just about profits or market share. They were about rebuilding trust, restoring faith in leadership, and creating a culture where everyone feels valued." The crowd was silent, listening intently. "We've come a long way, but our journey is far from over. The work we've done here has shown that a company's true strength lies in its people. You are the reason we've succeeded. And as we move forward, I promise that I will continue to put our people first, to make sure that TechCore is a place where everyone can thrive." A round of applause filled the room, and Eva smiled. It was a moment of validation, a recognition that the sacrifices and struggles had been worth it. The toxic culture that had once defined TechCore was gone, replaced by a sense of pride, purpose, and unity. As the event continued, Eva found herself reflecting on the future. The company was stable, the employees were happy, and the profits were rising. But Eva wasn't content to rest on her laurels. She had always been driven by a desire to make a difference, to push the boundaries of what was possible. Sitting in her office later that evening, she drafted a new vision for TechCore's future. It wasn't just about growing profits or expanding into new markets. It was about using the company's success to give back to the community, to create opportunities for people who had been overlooked or underestimated. Ava had always believed that business could be a force for good, and now she had the chance to prove it. Her vision was ambitious. TechCore would partner with local schools and colleges to create internships and apprenticeships for underprivileged students, giving them the skills and experience they needed to succeed in the tech industry. The company would also invest in sustainable technologies, working to reduce its environmental footprint and become a leader in green innovation. Eva knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges and obstacles along the way, but she was ready. She had always thrived on challenges, and now she had the power to make real change, not just within the company, but in the world. A few weeks later, Daniel, the former janitor who had been promoted to a supervisory role, knocked on her office door. He stepped in, holding a report on the latest project his team had completed. "I just wanted to say thank you, Eva," Daniel said, his voice filled with sincerity. "You gave me a chance when no one else would, and it's changed my life. I'm proud to be part of TechCore." Eva smiled, feeling a swell of pride. "You earned it, Daniel. Your hard work and dedication are what make this company great." As Daniel left her office, Eva reflected on the journey she had taken to get to this point. She had faced countless obstacles: discrimination, doubt, and the constant pressure to prove herself. But she had never given up, never let the voices of those who didn't believe in her drown out her own. Now she stood at the helm of a company that was thriving, not just because of its products or profits, but because of its people. TechCore was a place where everyone, from the janitors to the executives, was valued. And that, more than anything, was the legacy Ava wanted to leave behind. The future was bright, and Ava knew that there was still much work to be done. But she was ready. She had always been ready.